Hello and welcome to FortiGuard Live. I'm Derek Manky, and joining me is my esteemed guest, Aamir Lakhani. How are you, Aamir?
I am doing wonderful. How are you doing today, Derek?
I'm doing really well. I know this is like a boilerplate. We can get a stamp and just put this on, I think, every episode that we do. But it's been a busy week. It's been a busy month. It's been a busy quarter. It's been a busy year. We'll talk about that. I mean, we've been kept busy in the industry, obviously, of cybersecurity because of the growing ransomware threat. So I wanted to talk to you about that today. We just released actually about three over the course. It's basically weekly. We're releasing a threat signal, which is our FortiGuardLIVE's response to a breaking ransomware threat. Now we had 21 nails and 5 hands as an example. There's so much activity happening lately. Of course, there was also an attack on OT, targeted ransom attack. What we're seeing is that really there's a shift from 5-10 years ago, where it was just broadly commercialized kits that anyone could pick up and distribute and try to send out volumetric spam emails and land as many targets as possible. So that how many fish can they catch and charge a nominal fee, $500 to $1,000, and call it a day. That was just going after data as the currency, right? I mean, encrypt the data, and then they're under the assumption that people weren't doing backups or imaging servers, and that model worked for a while, but it doesn't seem to be working anymore, does it?
No, absolutely not. I mean, it's because the money aspect is so much bigger than it was, right? It's so much more profitable. I mean, we're not talking about $500 to $1,000 ransom. It's not uncommon to see 1 million, 2 million, 3 million. In fact, we just saw recently, that was made public. One corporation paid about a $4 million ransom. And these numbers are getting very serious, very high. And that obviously means it attracts a lot more organized, cyber criminals, and it also attracts a lot more sophistication into the attacks because the payoff is so enormous now.
Yeah, it's a huge problem, and really, what's happening? There's always an inverse to the legitimate world. You basically have what was, again, 5 to 10 years ago, this SMB to SME, a small medium enterprise. As they started getting more profits through that model, they started getting more funding, they started getting more tools, they started getting more players behind them as well. And by virtue, they've grown now, some of them, into these big ransomware gangs that are essentially large criminal enterprise. And that's because of this funding, right? Because they keep on getting more funding, more profits, more people are joining. And really what's happening is that the criminal supply chain is also expanding. Like, there's more of these business units also to these organizations.
Yeah, so Derek, I think you mentioned an important point, and one that can be easily overlooked. But the reason this is working is because people are paying. Like, people are actually are paying for ransomware criminals. They're paying ransomware criminals to get their data back. And a lot of times, it's easy for us to say, hey, never pay, right? We like, as we were talking earlier, we're both really passionate about that. We don't advocate, at least I personally don't advocate paying, but it's also easy to understand where a corporation may be coming from if they have absolutely no other choice and they really think they're going to get their data back, especially if it's data that can make a difference, right? We've seen ransomware attack public utility, police departments, OT departments, or OT technology, where it'll actually make a difference in people's lives, maybe a life or death type of a difference as well if the service is down. So I could see why people are motivated to pay as well, especially these high numbers.
Yeah, and the other difference we're seeing is that this is now, like, with these large criminal enterprises, it's big stakes, right? The sophistication is higher from the criminal element. The payments are higher, as you said, 7 figures are normal. It's a huge amount. But it's because they're going after big fish. They're going after deep pockets. They're going after, it's not just data, but critical services. We actually called this out in our threat predictions piece, where we talked about targeted ransom attacks becoming the new normal, going after these, it's not just data, but critical services. We saw some of that in 2020, but it's really picking up steam, which is a huge concern in 2021. And these are more This is very much like APT group activity, but it's, I think, extending now into the private sector, if you will, these ransomware gangs and the criminal enterprise too, right?
Right. One example of this is DarkSide, obviously the gang that's making a lot of news lately.
Yeah.
One of the things that they do, as you mentioned, they're very targeted. So when they send the ransom note, a lot of times it has the corporation's name. It has very specific information about that corporation. They release some of their data, usually on their darknet onion website. So it's enough information that it's almost like a proof of life. Like, hey, we really do have your data, and we have a lot more of it. Here's just a little sample of it, so we're really serious about that. And so it's very targeted, it's very serious, and it's very customized to that environment. They actually, when we look at some of the code on some of the attacks that we've seen it actually check for specific versions of systems, operating systems, even applications that may be specific to an organization. So they're trying to really target and really get narrow on who they're attacking. Obviously, it doesn't work all the time, and no matter what, when I hear attack organizations, threat actors always say, we're not going to go after hospitals or charities, and almost all the time they have blowback, or you have unintended targets, but at least they seem to be very targeted. At least they seem to be very focused on who they're going for.
Yeah, you just hit on a very interesting point. Is the collateral damage, right? The unintended targets. So I know with DarkSide, so we just released a threat signal with FortiGuard Labs on that, as well as a blog. They claim their modus operandi is financial, right? They're going after, again, the deep pockets, the ransom, versus, again, the APT, which is typically going after critical infrastructure. But what we're seeing is this adverse, effect, right? Where by crippling systems and services, again, going after ransom, it's also having an effect on society, on physical lives, of course, on other things like stock markets too, and that's a big issue. That line, this is what I mean, that line between the APT groups and their targets and this criminal enterprise is being blurred even more. And what's concerning is that they're getting more bold and more brazen. I mean, obviously, we know that cybercrime has no ethics. But they are becoming even more bold and brazen, I think, in their moves. They're reaching out directly to these organizations to actually communicate with them. I know you've seen some of this chatter, on dark web, where they're actually setting up, and this is what I mean about that supply chain expanding. They're actually setting up service and support channels. Like, it used to just be the suppliers creating new, 0 days and malware kits and botnets. And they had the infrastructure model, like botnet as a service. And now there's also this support department that's growing with them, right?
Not only do they have a support department, they have a very sophisticated and well-oiled machine in the support department. So if you are a victim, they're always available 24/7. It's actually not a contentious relationship. They're not trying to make the victim upset. They're actually trying to provide very good service to them. We've actually seen some evidence. We've been involved in some investigations where we've actually seen the communication go back and forth. You got to remember, these threat actors are asking for $4 million and $5 million, whatever this amount is. You obviously you're going to provide really good customer service if you're charging that premium, even if you're a criminal. And we've seen this back and forth. In fact, they've actually given a lot of times when victims pay the ransom, the threat actors go back and give the victims good advice, saying hey, this is how we actually got into your system. This is what you were missing. You were missing these patches, these configurations. Maybe you should run these other types of security products, and that would have prevented us. So they're actually providing a little bit of a service too sometimes, and they're very legitimate about it, because they have a reputation to keep. They want people to know, if you pay us, we're actually going to give your data back. We're going to delete your data, so that way we can charge your premium. Obviously, that doesn't stop another threat actor from going behind and attacking that same organization or the same.
And let's talk about that. Another threat actor. This is the other thing we're seeing again. I know we were talking the other day about this. If we look back to the Cyber Threat Alliance, when we founded it in 2014, one of the first projects we worked on was a report on CryptoWall version 3. This was actually an effort to disrupt that gang at the time. It was like a 70-page white paper, is a first of its kind collective between security vendors, as an example. And it effectively worked, because the day after we released that report, that crypto version 3 essentially went offline. They shifted tactics. They tried to release a fourth version that never really took off. But it was just one target, right? Like basically one ransomware gang that was in the spotlight at the time. Now, if you look at our threat landscape report that our last one that we released, we're highlighting 9-10 of these gangs that we're tracking on a daily basis, and that number is growing. And again, I think it's because of all these profits and more stakeholders coming in, and essentially you have this diversification, right? More tools, techniques, procedures, code, more people, and more actually structured organizations now too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So once again, you have to remember ransomware is usually the last part of an attack, of a data breach. Usually, threat actors are getting into an organization, they're stealing data, they're getting the data out, and really the last thing they do after they've gotten all the valuables, right, all the all the golden keys, then they're exploding the malware. They're executing that malware as kind of a last-ditch effort or a parting gift a lot of times, and trying to get the most value or the most money back. A lot of times we've also seen threat actors explode or execute the malware, the ransomware specifically, if they feel like they're about to get caught, if there's like an investigation going on. So, from that standpoint, we see a lot of ransomware, and we do see the sophistication because it's normally part of a much bigger attack a lot of times. And that bigger attack is usually taking advantage of a lot of vulnerabilities, unpatched systems, phishing attacks, other types of attacks as well. So we do have the sophistication piece of an attack coming through by a botnet or some other type of malware delivery network, and then we have the ransomware added on top of that.
Yeah, definitely. And the problem just seems to be spiraling right now when it comes to the amount of profits again that cyber criminals are making. These ransomware gangs, again, like I said, it's not just one, but 10 plus of these. I know even if you look at APT groups like with MITRE, who we work closely with, there's just under 100 of those now APT groups that are tracked. And I fully expect these ransomware gangs and large enterprise groups, I fully expect them to grow larger than that, more than 100 that we're dealing with. We're not quite there right now, but it seems to be heading in that direction. And, it's because, there's some stat that, it's in the physical world. If you look at the US as an example, if you commit a crime, there's a, greater than 50% chance. There's a big chance that, because it's something that has been in place for centuries, right? If you commit a crime, you're going to jail. That's the message. People are actually afraid about that in a lot of cases, but in cybercrime, again, they're brazen. They're not afraid about that. It's a very, very low chance right now. Of course, we always talk about the bad news, but we are working on this, and that's why we're here as well. This is that disruption strategy, right? When we look at how we try to disrupt the supply chain, the criminal supply chain, it's not just about all the great stuff we do at Fortinet, of course, like with the fabric and protection. That's a very key part. Make networks more resilient, but it's this whole other piece of the industry we need to do to focus on how we can really hit the cyber criminals where it hurts. Try to actively work with law enforcement investigations as well, like we do with Interpol.
Yeah, no, I think you make some great points out there, like in general. First of all, it's always easy to talk about everything that's going wrong, like, with ransomware, because we hear about these attacks over and over again. But let's not forget, like, as you mentioned, all the things that are going right as well. First of all, now more than ever, like pretty much everyone knows about cyber attacks and knows about ransomware. Right. Yeah. It used to be, even a couple of years ago, even when me and you were dealing with other security professionals, you didn't take it as seriously. It was always something like, hey, that's never going to happen to me. Or when they heard about a cyber attack, they really thought, man, this company must have not had their proper controls in place. They must have not been taking security seriously. Now we know that's not the case. We know attackers are getting into organizations that do take security very seriously, that they do have all the right controls in place. So people have been made aware of that. And now they're like, wow, I really got to get my act together and make sure I have visibility, I have protections, I have detections, and I have a trained staff. And I think that's great news. I think overall, we're seeing that having an impact not only on on fighting ransomware, but fighting cyber attacks in general, and then raising awareness. And that awareness is going to other people in that organization, into that company, into that business. And that's helping those individual people when they get attacked at home, attacked at other venues as well. Like, just have a little more awareness that these cyber attacks can happen. These other types of scams can happen as well that are just beyond the scope of cyber attacks. And it's just, I think it's raising the profile of just people in general, which I think is a great thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And on the education piece and awareness, we're seeing that firsthand with our NSC certification, with our information security and awareness training. The numbers are going up. It's a big difference, and it's fantastic to see people invested and good things happening there. Always so much to talk about, Aamir. I really appreciate your thoughts. Thanks so much. More to come on this, so stay tuned. This is Derek Manky with FortiGuardLIVE.